This is Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. I'll be joined this week by Aaron Newcomb when we go over PIP and the Python Package Index. That's coming up next. Floss Weekly is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Securing every access point in your company doesn't have to be a challenge. LastPass unifies access and authentication to make securing your employees simple and secure, even when they are working remotely. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is Floss Weekly, episode 594, recorded Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020. PIP and the Python Package Index. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. Did you know that 91% of all cyber attacks start with an email? To uncover the threats hiding in your Office 365 account, get a secure and free email threat scan at barracuda.com/floss. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. I'm joined this week by Aaron Newcomb, my co-host. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, how's it going? Looks like you're in a comfortable chair there.
I'm in a comfortable antique chair on what is the set of Knives Out. Actually, if you saw the whole place, that's what it looks like here. I think it's my last week here. This is at a borrowed house that I'm staying in San Marino, California.
Oh, wow.
After hopefully next week I'll be back in Santa Barbara where we live. But for now I'm here, and you're somewhere. You're on the internet.
I'm still at home. Like most people are these days. And I've got, in my study with my wife's stuff back there and my stuff on this side that you can't see. It's same old, I guess. I mean, I've worked from home for almost 20 years now. So I'm kind of used to it, but I know it's different for a lot of people that are used to going to the office or whatever. And now they're stuck at home. Certainly a lot busier these days with my wife being a 7th grade English teacher and doing that from home, and my youngest son is still in school, so he's doing his classes. And I'm about to reach out to Comcast and see if we can maybe get an upgrade or something, because we're definitely using up our bandwidth these days.
Yeah. So our topic this week, we're on the Python case, among other things. Are you familiar with the Python Package Index and installer and the topics we're going to go into this morning?
A little bit. I'm a user, right? So I'm not certainly haven't done anything specific with the project itself, but I use PIP, to especially when I'm setting up a new system and I've got to get my stuff running. It's like, I'm missing this package and I'm missing that. So I definitely have used PIP in the past, and it seems like there's a lot of ways to install Python packages, and that's something I want to talk about a little bit with our guests as well. Is when do I just run setup? When do I use PIP, and what's actually happening behind the scenes? Like, it just seems like there's 3 or 4 different ways if you include more than that, if you include all the package management systems that come natively with your Linux operating system to install packages for Python. So I kind of want to get into when do you use one versus the other? What are the advantages? Those are some of the things that I've always wondered in the past, just myself, just as a user. So it'll be really interesting.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. So first, this episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda, the provider of cloud-enabled enterprise-grade security solutions that protect email, networks, data, and applications. Suddenly we have dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of employees working remotely. This is life in our times, and every one of them is getting tons of emails every day, making them vulnerable. 91% of all cyber attacks, in fact, start with an email. There's spear phishing, ransomware, account takeover, conversation hijacking, and then you multiply that by how many employees, how many emails, One click on the wrong email can cost you money, customers, and reputation. Barracuda researchers have seen a steady increase in the number of coronavirus-related spear phishing attacks since January and have observed a recent spike of 667% in this type of attack, and that's since the end of February. Get the protection you need for your company with Barracuda Total Email Protection. It includes all-in-one email security, backup and archiving, AI-based protection from spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise, an automated incident response that gives you options to quickly and efficiently address attacks, security awareness training to educate your workforce so your employees can be the first line of defense against attacks. And, right now there are new attacks impersonating organizations like the World Health Organization. Attackers utilize domain spoofing and promise information relating to the coronavirus in an attempt to trick users into a phishing scam. So ensure the safety and security of your business with Barracuda. To uncover threats hiding in your inbox, get a secure, free email threat scan for your Office 365 account, risk-free at barracuda.com/floss. That's barracuda.com/floss. Barracuda, your journey secured. So let me get back to the right page here, and welcome aboard Sumana Harihareswara. Harihareswara.
Honey,
I'm sorry,
my name.
You do it.
You can call me Sumana for the rest of this. My name is Sumana Harihareswara.
And we know each other. I should add this. We've hung out. I mean, we
Yep. And I have a recording of how to say my name. I have a recording of how to say my name on my website in case you want to have me back at some future time and practice between now and then.
Do you have a little prize for when people get all the way through it?
I think the prize is that you don't feel like an embarrassed person.
Well, I've been told I'm not capable of that, so maybe that's my prize to begin with. And also Pradyun Gedam, who's with us as well, and is your collaborator on much on your Python work. Hi, Pradyun. Did I handle your name right, which seems easier? Oh, your mic is off, I think. I think you're on mute.
I am. You got close enough.
Oh, good. And you're off mute now, which is even better. So, so either one of you, give us a quick briefing on your work with PIP and
Sure.
and where that's going and all of it.
Well, I want to start by talking a tiny bit about the context because Python is pretty unique in a bunch of ways when it comes to packaging. So it's an open source language, certainly, but there are open source languages like JavaScript where the platform where people store and get libraries for other people to use is not controlled by the community, right? We all saw what happened with NPM, which is, after all, a venture capital backed organization. What was it, March of last year? In Python, really all of the infrastructure for how people build and distribute and share and download and install packages is community built. It's been built organically over time, with the exception of some proprietary platforms or company stewarded platforms, right? So you get a very complex, non-linear supply chain where developers and sysadmins and end users follow these partially overlapping chains or parts of the tool chain hosted on lots of different computers, including their own computers and different bits of cloud and stuff like that. And then there's different tools that have emerged over time, such as there's the Python package index. You've interviewed some people who've worked on that in previous years. Not you personally, Doc, but Randall did. The Python package index, which lives in the cloud and is stewarded by the Python Software Foundation, a nonprofit. And then there's all these little bits of the tool chain living on the package creators, the maintainers' computer, or in their continuous integration, or on the user side. So a developer who's making a package is going to use utilities called wheel and setup tools and twine and things like that to create a package and upload it. They may use a different mix depending on what their tastes are. And then the end user probably uses pip. At least sometimes they type pip install something to download something, often from the Python package index, the Python package index, or PYPI, pypi.org, and install it on their computer. But sometimes they don't use pip. Sometimes they use something like Conda or pipenv, right? Which are other projects run by other people. Or sometimes they're not downloading and installing from PyPI, because you could grab a tarball of code and then have it locally and install it from there, maybe to save on bandwidth. Or maybe you have a proxy inside your company, a cache like Bandersnatch, or use Artifactory or something like that, and you're pip installing from that. It's a real complex ecosystem that has a lot of different moving parts that are controlled by different players. And most of it is open source of the type that has no telemetry built in, right? So those of us who are trying to improve that tool chain in various ways end up doing a lot of outreach to try and find out more about what people are actually doing. So I wanted to give you that context before maybe Pradyun could start by talking about the specific project that we're working on this year that he's leading.
So I think that answers my first question that I had in the run-up, which is, well, it partially answers it, right? It explains the background of why there's so much complexity. What's the right answer, though? Is there a right answer for people? Like, if someone's just getting started, like, should I use my own package manager to install the stuff I need, or should I always use pip, or how do I know what to use?
That's a really good question. So I am unfortunately going to tell you the same thing that I think puts fear into everyone's heart, which is, well, it depends, right? When you think about package management as an issue, it's not just language specific, right? If you think about different operating systems on different Linuxes, right? We have apt for the Debian and Ubuntu people. We have DNF, the follow-up to Yum, right, for Fedora and CentOS people. And then you have all these other approaches for Arch and Gentoo and things like that. And then on a language level, right, you might have the choice to use PyPI or something else, maybe to go with Conda and the Anaconda world. But if you're on a Mac, maybe you also have to deal with whether or not to use Homebrew for some things, right? On Windows, I don't know that much about the Windows package management world either, but we do see that there are situations where there are particular packages where you have 3 or 4 choices about how to install them, right? You could, if I'm on Debian, which I am, then I could install via apt. I could choose to install via pip. I could choose to install via Conda. I could download a tarball, or I could make, from a source on my own machine. And so I think that a person, this is very difficult to figure out if you're first getting started, but if you know the general realm of what kind of stuff you want to do, very likely there's an ecology of where the packages live and are maintained for the kinds of things you want to do. And so I would say try to stick with that and use whatever the package manager is that most people are using to do the kinds of things, maybe graphic design or Linux kernel development or data science or game design. These might be different domains where people have sort of clustered in, let's say in this particular chunk of data science, everyone does everything using Conda. So it's easier for you. You'll run into fewer problems using Conda. But Pradyun, I want to know if you disagree with me, because you have been working on pip specifically for multiple years, and maybe you're going to say no.
I actually agree with you. The answer is it depends. And I think you covered most of the points. It depends on what you're trying to do, because the way I put it is Python is a very flexible language, right? So there's a lot of things that lots of people are trying to do. And if you have one size fits all, you're not going to succeed at that. So part of why as a result of things growing organically, there are multiple solutions and some of them overlap. There's actually a really good overview of packaging for Python, which was sort of written to address this, that lives on packaging.python.org, which tries to address this. and basically talks about sort of how much control do you want on what you're getting, right? Whether you want just user space stuff, you just want the executable, whether you're depending on a pre-installed Python, whether you're using your own entire software distribution system because you want binary compatibility and strong controls. So it depends on what degree of control you're trying to do, where you're trying to deploy stuff, all stuff like that.
And I'm Pradyun, I'm really glad that Pradyun, I'm very, very glad that you brought up packaging.python.org because it is such an important resource. I want to especially give a shout out to Thea Flowers, who is a Python packaging toolchain maintainer who put a bunch of time into improving that documentation and making it really best in class. And if you have been depending on the first blog post that was a search result when you try to search for a particular problem having to do with Python packaging, I urge you to really consider that some of those things are years old, out of date, and no longer reflect what current best practices are. Please bookmark packaging.python.org and consider that to be your first source of truth when you're trying to figure out how to deal with a Python package creation, distribution, or installation problem.
That's a great tip. I mean, there is a lot of information out there, and it does change a lot quite frequently. And I do want to ask you about some of the newer things that are going on. But I wanted to ask Pradyun first about how long have you been working on it? We said you were the main guy here, I guess, in this case, in terms of working on this. How often or how long have you been working on it? How did you get started working on it?
So I've been working on PIP since 2017, back when I was in first year of college, undergrad, mostly because I got into Google Summer of Code and, well, I worked on PIP, specifically dependency resolution in PIP. That was my Google Summer of Code 2017 project. And to think that I would solve that was optimistic at best. Delusional is also something someone said to me once. So that's sort of how I got started. I have been the release manager for most of PIP's releases since 2018. And yeah, I spend a lot of my time on it. This year, the PSF actually applied for a grant. And we secured funding from two funders, Mozilla Open Source Software. No, MOS.
Yes, Open Source Support.
What's the form of MOS again?
Mozilla
Open Source
Support. Right.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. And CZI, Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, their Essential Open Source Software Grant, Open Source Software for Science Grant. I'm sorry, I'm bad at this.
That's a lot of acronyms to remember.
No, you're good.
It is.
This is fine. It's just fine.
So,
Pradyun, you did the most important thing. You thanked the people who are giving us the money.
I did, yes. Yay. So they funded us. And as part of the funding, we're actually able to get paid developer time to have people work on PIP full time, which has never happened before. And as far as I know, this is only the second time that anyone's getting proper full-time paid work done on Python packaging based of grants.
So I'm one of the grant writers who has been working on trying to get proper funding for the Python packaging toolchain for the last few years. I was one of the people who wrote the grant proposal to Mozilla that helped us overhaul PyPI back in 2017 and 2018. And then I helped us apply to the Open Tech Fund for some money to improve security, accessibility, and localization back last year. I also helped us get some money from Facebook, which is currently being used to improve the security of PyPI further.
I forgot about that. Yes.
It's okay. It's all, bit by bit, right? But this is one reason why I also co-founded the project funding working group under the Python Software Foundation, because we sort of created a beachhead here where we've done bits and bits, $100,000 here, $100,000 there of getting funding for bits of the world of the Python packaging toolchain, which can be kind of ridiculous given how many people depend on it, right? So a few of us are working on more stuff and trying to help more people get funding either from nonprofits, foundations, or companies who depend on this stuff so that we can move forward with some things that really need to happen. But I wanted to also say, Pradyun is such a Google Summer of Code success story, right? Here he was coming into the project as a new person, as a college first-year student in 2017, as one of several people working on Python packaging at that time. And so now he's risen to be a maintainer of PIP, one of the people being paid currently to work on PIP, the release manager for PIP, and a really trusted voice in Python packaging. We have several colleagues who are also maintaining PIP along with Pradyun, but he's putting the most time into it right now. He's one who's being paid, and I really appreciate the chance to get to work with him.
That's awesome. It's such a great story. I was going to say exactly what you just did. I often tell people that ask me how to get started in software engineering, while they're in school and then out of school, they always say, how do I get started? How do I get started? It's like, find an open source project, start working on it, start contributing, and then you have some work, some measurable work under your feet, so to speak, that you can go talk to potential employers about. Here's the work that I've actually done, and open source is such a great way to do that. And so we're just going to, put your picture in a glass case, Pradyun. We're going to put it in the glass case, and we're going to say, this is the example. This is the North Star for people that want to do this. Go look at Pradyun and what he's done. No, I think it's awesome. So are you done with your
Didn't you give a keynote at PyCon South Korea recently that was partly about this journey?
It was exactly about this journey of sort of how I ended up on that stage that day, talking about just what's happened since I got started with programming, basically, and how I ended up keynoting at an international conference. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll have to go look that up. I want to watch that because this is something that I'm passionate about as well. But we're getting off topic a little bit. By the way, are you done with your coursework now, or are you still in school?
I just graduated. A month
congratulations.
Ago. Yeah, a month ago.
Fantastic. That's awesome. We're kind of odd. I know it's an odd time for people that are seniors. My daughter was a senior in high school. I know it's odd right now with everything going on, but that's fantastic that you're able to do that. Really exciting. So let's go back and talk a little bit about some of the things that are new, because as a hobbyist, as an end user, I know I don't follow a lot of the new things that are going on and some of the changes. So I'm not sure who should take that one to start off with.
Well, I think that I want to very briefly talk about why we're talking to you right now, why Pradyun and I are currently being paid on this contract where the PSF got money from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative and Mozilla open source support, because the PIP Dependency Resolver is one of those, look, you pop the hood and you're like, this is what's been running the whole time. This is what I've been depending on to get me 60 miles an hour on the freeway. Sometimes I tell people that up till now, I think the Dependency Resolver was kind of the three kids in a trench coat trying to get admission at the movie theater. So computers need to know what order to grab and install pieces of software, right? To install X, you need to install Y first. And PIP, which is Python's most widely used download and installation tool, it currently has serious issues, right? All the versions up till now with correctly navigating conflicts among those dependencies that different programs need. So if you want to pip install like the drink tea and it needs water 0.9 or below, but you also want to pip install coffee and it needs water 1.2 or above, well, what should pip do with that, right? And it's been very inconsistent up until now, making decisions that you could not rely on reproducibly, right? And so this would result in serious problems for a lot of users, for the larger ecology as well. And so this was what we've known for years, that we needed to fix. And Pradyun and many other developers have been working on that and cleaning up a bunch of technical debt, cleaning up build logic within PIP so that we could do this heart transplant, really. So last year, I led the grant writing to get some funding to fund Pradyun and some other developers to work on this, me to project manage it, and some user experience researchers to work with us to figure out, what do users expect when they type these things? What is their mental model of what's going to happen next? What do they currently find surprising, not just about PIP, but about the packaging world more generally? And how can we make the PIP user experience better, including with better error messages that aren't incredibly voluminous, but tell people what they need to know in a way that they can understand it when a problem happens. And so we know that this change is going to end up being real disruptive for a lot of people, because they've come to rely on extremely lenient processing that maybe was just predictable enough for their purposes. And now, as of October in PIP 20.3, things by default are going to be stricter. And so some workflows will temporarily break as people fix up how they've specified their configurations, what upstreams they're drawing from, and things like that. And like so many of these kinds of changes, right, we think it's going to be a short-term disruption for a much better foundation for future work for everybody. And we can go into all that in more detail, but that's the huge change that's coming in October, PIP 20.3. And that's why we're really hoping a lot of people will upgrade to 20.2 now and try out the beta of the new functionality. You can find out more at pip.pypa.io and try out the beta of the new functionality, see if anything breaks in what you do or in what upstreams you're drawing from, right? The dependencies that you're installing, and report bugs and try and fix as much as possible before October.
That's a great call out. How I guess the only way to know, is there anything proactive that you can do to, like, do you know, okay, if you're doing this, you're going to be impacted by this change when we make it? Is there any proactive communication that you can be doing to try to head off some of those disruptions?
Existing versions of PIP will print a warning in cases where, well, your workflow will break, that we definitely know will happen. Basically, situations where PIP's hitting a conflict in the dependency resolution, it's saying, hey, I didn't do this properly, and I will in the future, which will change your result. Fix yourselves, please. Something along those lines, but nicer.
And so we're trying to do that as much as we can in, we have these point releases that are out now, like 20.2. I think we're up to 20.2.3 or something like that, as we've gotten a little bit more feedback and we fix bugs and things like that. We know some things that people should watch out for. If you are currently depending on PIP having a particular undocumented kind of predictable behavior when it comes to incompatible requirements, well, then you should probably fix that. You should install PIP 20.2. You should run pip check. Pip check validates your current environment and tells you, hey, it's like running with -- strict in a compiled language, right? It tells you about, hey, this is kind of iffy. I'm just letting you know, since you want to know whether things are valid, this is not so valid. And then you install something using the turning on the beta feature with -- use - feature equals 2020 - resolver. Information about all this is in our documentation at pip.pypa.io. And you please report bugs to us, take our survey, and let us know what is or isn't working for you. Or if you find out there's something in your code or in the code of software you depend on, then report that, please. We've already seen that some people had to, I believe, report something upstream to TensorFlow and NumPy. Is that correct, Pradyun?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
Right.
Awesome. So people are picking up on on this and starting to take action, which is great. Something I thought you might mention in kind of your setup into some of the problems and why you're having to kind of, I don't want to say fix things, improve things. That's the right word, improve things in the future. Something I thought you might mention and you didn't is blockchain. No, not blockchain. I'm just kidding. That's so people that are listening can have a drink now, because that's one of our words.
I was really wondering, Aaron, where you were going with that. I was thinking, okay, is this really where we're headed? I was sort of internally girding myself for Aaron. Although I'm sure the blockchain has many uses, blah, blah, blah.
No, I'm sorry. I was just doing that for our listeners so that they could have a drink now.
Well, I'm going to have a drink too.
There you go. The actual thing I was going to ask is if there are things going on, because this is just from I work a lot in cloud native environments, working with monitoring tools and things. And so I'm just kind of curious if there's anything going on with either, the shift towards cloud native and DevOps, or I'm also thinking serverless environments, if there's anything in those realms that are causing changes to happen in PIP or in the surrounding environment that surrounds PIP in order to make it work more effectively. And if the answer is no, that's fine.
I'm trying to think. Pradyun, if you have an immediate thought, go ahead, but I have
nothing that comes immediately to mind, no.
Okay. I think there's something broader about automation, though, to say. I think that when I think of DevOps, one of the things that I think about is the reduction of toil, right? Which is work that computers are better at than humans, and we should automate it away so that humans only do things that brains should do rather than CPUs, right? And I think that this makes a tremendous amount of sense, that when people are working on software that they're trying to distribute to other people, let's automate away as much as possible the checklist stuff, like literally typing, twine and then some command to upload the software to the Python package index, for instance. So very much on that side of things, of the creation of software, we're seeing more and more people building into their continuous integration setups or using GitHub Actions, the upload step to PyPI. Now, what that often correlates with is more frequent releases. And when you release more frequently and automatedly, maybe there's a somewhat higher chance that, that release, as it turns out, end users have some problem, right? It turns out we don't want that release anymore. And that, I do think if we didn't have as much automation happening, maybe we wouldn't have gotten around as fast to some of the changes that we're seeing in the larger ecosystem. And when I say we at this point, I'm not just talking about Pradyun and me, I'm talking about everyone who works on Python packaging. Pradyun, do you want to talk about yanking and what it is and why it's useful?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things around automation, because you went in that direction, was when you install a package and you have something that's, say insecure, right? You don't want that on your deployment at the end of the day. One of the things that recently happened on PyPI is we enabled a new feature to yank releases, which means installers don't install them by default unless you're explicitly saying, hey, I want this insecure version. It won't install it. And if it still does install an insecure version because it's been yanked, installers will now print a warning, at least in the Python ecosystem. So that's a new feature that's happened on PyPI as a result of sort of more automation coming into the space and so on. To your specific question of cloud native stuff affecting Python packaging, nothing that comes to mind directly. Partly because a lot of the users are indirect, if that makes sense. No one's invoking pip directly on the command line. And in all likelihood, they're not using pip for installation unless they're doing something interesting. So yeah, nothing that comes to mind directly to me.
I think users who are interested in how Python performs on a lot of different systems and on, in particular, like more advanced architectures and things like that, might be interested in the world of many Linux, but that's really its own show. I don't want to spend too much of people's time getting into all the nitty-gritty of it unless people are particularly interested. But there has been some advance there.
Yes, so we have about 20 minutes or less left. I'd like to ask about a couple other things. So, but we can stay on this if we want to. So I'd like to know a little bit about ChangeSet Consulting. I know your experience with what goes wrong with companies is rather large, Sumana. So that and just anything else you might want to talk about. Your comedy, I think, is fantastic, and that's another thing. I mean, you're a person of many talents, but we're on a roll with Python. So if we want to stick with that, that's great too.
How about we talk for a few minutes about me and non-Python things, and then maybe in about 10 minutes, I'd like to get back, and I have a couple of things I think Pradyun could especially well talk about.
Excellent. Let's go with it.
Sure. So I've been doing stand-up comedy of some sort or another since I was a child. You know, I was like so many people, someone who turned into a ham once they got their hands on a microphone, and I did stuff at, the 6th grade talent show and things like that. And then about 10 years ago was the first time that I did stand-up comedy specifically for a tech audience. And this was at a Google Summer of Code Mentor Summit. And I did some stand-up that was specifically about things like, making up new open source licenses and the fact that you don't get hazard pay for having to deal with certain people in the free and open source software movement and stuff like that. And every once in a while, I go and do some more. For instance, I think maybe a month ago, I was at Guadec in late July, and I did maybe a 20-minute set. And it's fun. It's great. I miss live audiences when I do stand-up, but doing something over Big Blue Button was, almost good enough. And I also really think that our stories, we people who make technology, generally aren't represented in mass media, right? When you see movies or TV shows about people who are making software, a lot of times it's really an office comedy with some jargon sprinkled in, or it's a spy thriller with people typing a lot, or it's a story, a rags to riches story, or a tycoon story just with more typing, right? The feelings of what it's like to make technology, the experiences of having someone review your code, or of having to make architectural decisions or things like that, that often doesn't come across in our mass media. And so I actually wrote and performed in some plays about making software. And then I started a play festival that happened at PyCon last year called Art of Python to try to encourage more of this. And now there's a few more of those things springing up around the country and possibly around the world, people making plays and similar performance art about programming, not art made with programming, not stuff like the sometimes really wonderful computational poetry or music that's computer generated or things like that. I'm talking about performance art like plays or novels or things like that that are about what it's like to be a programmer. And I would highly recommend anyone listening read Ellen Ullman's The Bug, which is a fantastic sort of detective story about hunting a bug. It's one of the best fictional depictions of programming there is.
So, okay, so we can go back into Python. I think you want to do that anyway, right? We've got, we have about 15 minutes left. Yeah, something like that.
I'll briefly, because you wanted to know about ChangeSet. So, as I mentioned, I'm the project manager for this effort with PIP. And the thing that I'm doing, right, what is the heart of project management? Really, it's figuring out what questions need asking and then asking them and kind of not going away until people answer in a reasonable way about what is the timeline? Is this the most important thing? What is stopping us from getting this out and stuff like that? And hopefully getting out of people's way a lot. I have been a manager of some sort or another for quite some time in various companies and nonprofits and things like that. And about 5 years ago, I started my own independent consultancy, ChangeSet Consulting, to provide short-term targeted project management services to free and open source software projects. And ideally, really, I'm like the roadside assistance, right? I show up, a project's not doing as well as it could, and I give them the toe and the jump so they can get back on the road and I leave, right? Right now, I'm working with PIP. In the past, I've worked with Zulip, which is an open source Slack alternative, a really great chat application. I've worked with a variety of other projects. But the most important thing is I think people don't realize that just like you can hire a freelance developer or a freelance tech writer or a freelance designer, you can also hire a freelance maintainer. And I can come in and collaborate with your employees or contractors or volunteers for, let's say, a project that your company depends on but doesn't control. And I can talk to those volunteers and I can say, hey, do you mind if I help you with all the stuff that's behind other than, the specific feature development and code review? Usually they say, when can you start, right? And then I clean out the code review queue, clean out the bug tracker, update the docs, help them get the next release out, help them figure out the roadmap, ask the questions that probably someone's been meaning to ask but never got around to. And then they get the next release out and I leave and they're on a better track for the future. So it's a lot cheaper for a company to pay for that than to build their own thing or fork or switch to some other dependency. So I have some interesting projects in the hopper, but the main thing I'm working on right now, I really care about a lot of people hearing about the changes coming to PIP, because better forewarned, right, so that they don't experience any disruption in October when PIP 20.3 comes out.
What is the most common roadside assistance that's required? Just curious about that.
I think that if we're thinking about the category of open source projects that a bunch of people depend on, and I'm just going to preface this, right, because there exists a tremendous number of open source projects where nobody in particular depends on them. Maybe only the author or a few other people or organizations depend on them. But if you're thinking about things where there's a lot of other people and organizations that really would prefer that thing be a going concern, I think the most common roadside assistance that's necessary is a cleanup of what are the expectations here. What is the cadence of releases going to be? What are the features or architectural changes that are likely to happen? What is the speed of development? Who has power? Who is going to have power in the future? That is often what's needed. The thing that people believe they want is getting the next release out. And that's fine, right? It's absolutely fine for that to be the proximate cause, the salient need that gets them to say, hey, we should bring somebody in, maybe change that, right? But underneath that, people often need to get on the same page about what are you actually expecting out of each other and out of yourselves.
So I wanted to ask Pradyun, I think that's great, by the way. And I don't know, did you say, let me just clarify, did you say you only do that for open source projects, or do you do this for anyone? Because I can think of a lot of, big, commercial organizations that could use that kind of help as well.
I would prefer to only work in free and open source software. If a commercial organization cares about getting their engineering organization the clearest possible path forward, one of the things they really ought to do is check what their open source dependencies are and see what's coming. This one hasn't had a release in 8 years. And we're coming to the point of having to say, are we going to fork? Are we going to carry some patches or whatever? And that they can hire me, and I will be a lot cheaper than a full-time engineer figuring out how to build a replacement, right? So there's that. But yes, if someone wanted me to work on proprietary software and wanted to pay me a really tremendous amount of money, I would talk to them. But right now, I'm very happy with only working on free and open source software. But let's go ahead. Yeah, Pradyun, what is your question for Pradyun?
Yeah, I do want to ask Pradyun as well. I was thinking about, the number of contributors to PIP. So you said that you were working part-time, full-time, I guess, on this now as release manager. But I mean, how many people are working behind the scenes to make PIP happen? How many contributors do you have?
So back in 2017, I think it was 3 people, other than myself, who is a first-year undergrad student. But since then, we've onboarded, I think, 3 more maintainers. So we're 7 maintainers at this time. We had Paul, who was also working part-time for a bit as part of the grant-funded work this year, and Suping as well, who is also a triager on PIP. But yeah, it's 7 people plus 2 or 3, all of them volunteers except for, this grant-funded project.
I want to, let me give the context. Let me give you the context a little bit, which is, so remember how I mentioned this complicated tool chain of all these different bits of project? So generally there's some cluster, right, of people who work on this project, and then that overlaps with people who work on this project, that overlaps with, and approximately everyone is volunteering, or maybe they get a bit of side time at their job to work on it, right? This is one of the most important tool chains in the entire industry, and it's almost entirely unfunded, which is why the Python Software Foundation tries to get sponsorships, why we try to get grants, why we're asking for corporate money, and so on. And Pradyun and several other people, when he's talking about, there were 3 of us and now there's about 7, he's talking about PIP specifically. And then there's a separate, not necessarily overlapping chunk of people working on Python package index, for instance.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of other sort of tools. So within the Python Packaging Authority, which is sort of a volunteer working group in some ways, there's 4 or 5 projects that are super relevant. And yeah, most of them have like anywhere between 1 to 3 maintainers. And there's overlap. I'm a maintainer of a bunch of PyPI projects. So it's a small group still, considering the amount of tool chains that are built on top of this that depend on it.
Exactly. That's what I was going to mention, is that, it does seem like a small amount of people for how popular the language itself is. It's always in the top 3, I would say, depending on, which survey you prefer that goes out. And so, considering the amount of work that's being done on a daily basis, people working in Python, and to have such a small amount of people on this project, and in some cases for open source project, that's a lot of people, right? But I just think the impact that this has, on the whole industry, the whole technology industry, right? It's kind of amazing to me that such a small group of people can make such a big difference and make something that people depend on a daily basis to get their job done and get it done efficiently and effectively.
Absolutely.
So kudos to the team.
So the core language, right? C Python, which is to say the Python programming language, which is implemented in C. That has 60 maintainers maybe, and probably a lot of them aren't very active anymore. But even that, if you think the situation with the Python package tool chain is, wait, what? It's been running on baling wire and duct tape this whole time. Well, the fact that almost no one who's working on the core Python programming language is funded to do so. The fact that almost all these people are just working in their side time, right? There's maybe a couple of people who get paid as part of their work at companies to do this is astounding.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And go ahead,
Pradyun. Back in 2017, the situation for PIP is very much, precarious, because if I remember correctly, we had not had a release in over a year. And sort of the entire situation with a lot of Python packaging tooling reminds me of the recent XKCD comic about dependencies, of that one dependency that, it's been maintained by someone since 2013 and everybody depends on it. A lot of Python packaging feels like that.
I wanted to ask too, and you may not know this off the top of your head. Sorry, I didn't prepare you for this ahead of time, but maybe this information is published someplace. Do you keep track of the most popular packages that people are installing? Is there a list somewhere of by number of downloads or number of, do you keep track of any of that statistical data?
Sort of, yes, but.
So, yeah.
Go ahead, Pradyun.
So PyPI itself does not publish the numbers anywhere directly. What we do is we essentially keep a record of these on BigQuery. So Google has donated us some space on their BigQuery platform to essentially store information about downloads from PyPI, which anybody can query. I think there's 1 terabyte a month free queries for people if they want to do that. And a lot of people, because, the Python ecosystem is huge, have built websites and tooling on top of that to make it easier to see things. Some of them that I'll call out would be pypistats.org. So pypistats. and pepy.tech. Both of those sort of aggregate these download stats and make nice, pretty graphs out of them that you can use. So yeah, this information is there, not directly from PyPI in some ways.
And the bug that I would share there is this is wildly unreliable. This data is wildly unreliable for a number of reasons. One, Fastly, the CDN, the Content Delivery Network company, Fastly has donated kindly to PyPI the usage of their CDN, which means that a tremendous number of the requests, the successful requests for packages to install, never hit our database, right? So we're not, and we don't have tracking on that. So if it's cached, yeah, how are we seeing that? And so much happens through proxies and mirrors and so on. If I decide that I really want to amplify my performance and I'm building something in continuous integration all the time, and I decide, okay, I'm going to grab these dependencies, which I know are the ones that I want, and once a week I'll grab them and host them locally and I'll install from that. Well, then how is that getting counted, right? Or if I install things from PyPI and you install them from a mirror and this other person has some kind of continuous integration setup that somehow evades the cache and hits PyPI directly. These things, they're so distorted and we don't really, I think that we know some very broad things about what packages are more widely used, but I really want people not to think, oh, well, this is number 3 and this is number 6. Therefore, we absolutely know that the one at the number 3 spot is downloaded a lot more than the one at the number 6 spots. We just don't know that.
Yeah.
And then I just have, oh, sorry, go ahead, Pradyun.
Yeah, and a lot of cases within companies. Sorry. Hey.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anybody there?
Yes,
yeah,
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
In a lot of cases, for cool. I just switched to me and I was like, huh? What happened? Yeah, I was saying. So for a lot of people, for a lot of companies rather, it's very common to run an internal mirror of PyPI so that they don't have to rely on external networks for their deployments internally. They have an internal mirror that they can depend on. And we don't have those numbers because all PyPI sees is one download, whereas the company's probably using it 1,000 times and we only see one. So those numbers aren't 100% reliable. But yeah, they're about as good as it gets.
Okay. Every year, in coordination with the Python Software Foundation, the company JetBrains runs a developer survey. And it's pretty broad and gets thousands of responses. And so if people want to know more about what Python developers depend on, what they use, what they're trying to do, what their backgrounds are, and stuff like that, I would recommend you look at each year's JetBrains PSF Python survey.
Good pointer. Good pointer. I've got one more question, and then I'm going to hand it back to Doc to kind of wrap things up with our final 3 questions. And this kind of goes along the same lines. I think this is probably for Pradyun, actually. But I'm kind of curious what, and you may not have enough visibility on what people are actually doing to know this, but are there any tips that you would give out, either from looking at the issues that are coming in or questions that people ask, like best practices, basically, for people that are using PIP? Is there something that people always get wrong or always do incorrectly at first? Is there any kind of tip like that? So if there's one thing that you should know, when you're starting out using PIP, this is what it is. What would that be?
If you're on Linux, don't do sudo pip. That would probably be number 1 because you're fighting with the package manager. And yeah, you don't want to fight with your package manager. It's basically things you shouldn't do. That would be top of the line. 2 and 3, that would be interesting. Partly because it depends on what you're trying to do, right? I'm not sure, to be very honest. Use virtual environments to isolate your applications, simply because it keeps you from messing up your global Python, either by mistake or intentionally, if you're weird. So that would be another. And it also helps avoid dependency conflicts because Python, unlike other package managers like NPM, don't have cascading or rendered dependencies where you can have 2 packages depending on different versions and you'll have two versions at one time. You have a flat list of dependencies that have to be compatible. So using virtual environments to isolate things would be good. And I guess towards the end, yeah, I don't think I have more. Those would
this has
probably
been
be
great.
the two biggest ones.
Yeah, I wish we had an hour and a half or 2 hours or something like this. Is a very, very rich veins here. One quick question: is there anything we haven't asked you'd like us to have asked, and you could answer very briefly?
I would say, how do we keep up, right? How should people keep up with the conversation and with changes that are going to come affect them? I would say that you should watch blog.python.org, and there's an extremely low traffic mailing list at pypi-announce. pypi-announce. If you look that up, pypi-announce, that's a Python mailing list that will tell you just a few times a year, hey, this big change is coming that's going to affect you because it has to do with Python packaging, pip install, PyPI, and stuff like PyPI and stuff like that.
So, and the final questions are, and one of them may be self-answering. What are your favorite text editors and scripting languages?
I'll let Sumana take this one first.
Emacs is my text editor, and Python is the scripting language that I feel most fluent in and that I have a home in socially as well as digitally. But I want to say that perhaps my favorite one is one that I haven't met yet. I don't know yet, right?
Oh, wow. That's great. That's and Pradyun, go ahead. You're not off the hook.
I use Visual Studio Code primarily because it has a terminal right underneath. And yeah, Python is the scripting language I use most often. There's lots that I use, but Python's probably definitely on top.
How many shells do you have open at once? This is, that's a question I often have.
I think
I can tell you how many I have.
Oh, sorry go ahead, Pradyun. I think I usually have about 4 or 5 open, and I use tabs. I used a tabbed situation.
I see. I can check how many I have right now. I have 7.
Yes,
So
I don't mean to delay things. That's my own additional question I've started asking. I've noticed.
Okay, and here's a question: do you use a light theme? Do you use a dark theme? You know.
Yeah, we could go with that too.
I switch based on time of day. I'm a weird person.
I switch my terminal theme, whether it's dark or light, based on what I'm doing in it. So things that are just going to constantly run have one theme. Things where I'm actually paying attention and I'm doing stuff interactively. Yeah.
Well, listen, we're actually almost over time at this point. So this has been great. This has been a really great show. So thank you to both you guys. It's been really great. It's been really great having you on the show. And expect some action at it. I imagine you'll see some.
I really hope so. I hope a bunch of people sign up to our usability studies. There's, I hope, going to be a link in the show notes, but certainly on our Twitter feeds and on pip.pypa.io. And if you use Python, please sign up so that we can get more information to help you out.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much. So Aaron, you had some great questions there. That went really well, I thought. That's really glad you know this stuff better than I do.
Well, I wouldn't say I know it that well. I'm sure that there's people listening that, like I said before, I'm a hobbyist, right? So I prefer Python when I could use it. But it's not my day to day. So I'm sure there's people out there that were just dying to know maybe some very technical in the weeds questions that are, that I would not even aware of. But it was really interesting to hear what they had to say. This is one of those tools that, I don't know, I feel like people almost take for granted at some points. It's kind of like you take your package manager for your Linux system for granted. But when something goes wrong with it, you're in trouble, right? If that's what you're relying on to get things done. I mean, nobody wants to have to compile all their code all the time for every library that's on their system. And same thing with Python. You want to be able to just go quickly grab something and you want it to work and work reliably. And it sounds like they're fixing a few of the issues to make it more extensible and more usable in the future, which is great. That kind of change is difficult and hard, but my guess is it's not going to be as hard as going from Python 2 to Python 3, which I'm still struggling with. I'm trying to write all my new stuff in Python 3. And I know I'm behind the times, but I'm not going back to change, unless I have to for some reason. Once Python 2 eventually goes away completely, I'll have to do it. But I'm just going to leave my Python 2 stuff alone until it doesn't work anymore. I'm sure that's a lot of people's strategy. But yeah, really interesting to hear, and really also interesting to hear Pradyun's story, because it's something that is so relevant and something I've been saying for years and years now, is if you want to get started, if you want to get experience while you're in school and you don't have enough experience to join a club, or you don't know enough to start, if you feel uncomfortable going to a hackathon, you can't get an internship because you don't have enough experience, join an open source project, start contributing, start solving bugs, pick some issues that you think you can work on, start reading and understanding the code. And that's a tremendous amount of experience that a lot of people wouldn't have just taking their coursework in school. So I think that he really is a poster child for, the person that can jump in, get things done, and end up, really succeeding in this world because he got involved in open source.
Well, this may be the very first show that my grandson can watch or listen to, because he's 13, just turned 13, and I just heard that he's programming in Python. So a shout out to my grandson Simon on this thing, if he's still listening. So what have you got to plug? And let's do it quick, because we're kind of long on time at this point.
Sure. I'd say the biggest thing that I have to plug, something brand new. I talk about my book all the time, and that's getting a little old, but I will say something brand new is my new YouTube channel. It's called Retro Hack Shack. And you can go take a look at it. Just search for Retro Hack Shack or go to retrohackshack.com. What it is it's a YouTube channel that talks about restoring old computers, hacking old things to make them new again. I did do I have it sitting here? No, I don't. I just did the one that's in the works right now. It'll be published this weekend. I took an old Courier modem, an old US Robotics Courier modem. It's the long black one with the red LEDs on the front, and I turned it into a Knight Rider theme so that the LEDs go back and forth and it makes sounds like Knight Rider sounds and stuff. And so I walk through step by step how to add the microcontroller, where to connect it, how to add the sounds, all of that kind of stuff. And I've also done some Atari history stuff, and I've done composite mods for Atari, and I'm working on IBM PC 5150. So all that stuff that I normally do as a side project, I'm just starting to record it and put in some tips about how to do certain things, and then I'm releasing that as the Retro Hack Shack. So go check it out. Do a YouTube search for Retro Hack Shack, and you'll see me fixing up and doing things with old computers and video game systems and all that.
I still regret letting my Atari 2400 go. I still have an old TV to hook it up to, but oh well. So anyway, thanks so much. This has been Floss Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? I am Ant Pruitt, host at TWiT TV. Got a question for you. Have you gotten tired of how bad your photos are looking every time you post them to Instagram? Better yet, have you gotten yourself a new camera and you can't quite figure out why the images just don't look that good? Well, I have a solution for you. It's my show, Hands-On Photography. Each and every Thursday, I sit down and share different tips and tricks that are going to help make you a better photographer and a better post processor. So subscribe today at twit.tv/hop to learn more.